The crystalline recordings still played on repeat. In the command center of humanity's last military stronghold, buried 3 kilometers beneath the scarred surface of Europa, every officer who entered heard the same words, spoken in perfect, mocking English by a creature that had never set foot on Earth. "Your species amuses me," the Velthari king Murthic had declared, his 6 eyes gleaming with predatory delight as he addressed the United Nations. 37 years ago, you call yourselves apex predators, yet you surrender entire star systems. After losing a single battle, your warriors flee like prey animals when faced with true strength. Perhaps we shall keep some of you as curiosities teach you proper words in a civilized tongue. Admiral Kestra Voss paused the hologram with a sharp gesture, her scarred hand trembling slightly. Around the tactical table, her war council sat in grim silence. They'd all heard it before, but the sting never faded. 37 years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent in hiding. 37 years since they glassed our worlds, enslaved our colonies, and hunted us to the edges of known space. Commander Rip Valdez leaned forward, his prosthetic arm clicking against the table's metal surface. The reconnaissance teams confirm it Murthic is dead. Natural causes, they think. Heart failure during one of his feeding frenzies. Good riddance, muttered Chief Engineer Naya Okafor, her dark eyes flashing with barely contained rage. But his spawn are worse. They've been systematically wiping out the remaining human settlements. No prisoners, no slaves, just extermination. The hologram shifted to display intelligence reports from their deep cover agents. Images of human children in Velthari re-education camps, their minds broken and rebuilt to serve their captors. Videos of entire families executed for speaking their native languages. Documentation of genetic experiments designed to breed humans into more compliant livestock. His 3 heirs, Prince Kethver, Princess Yolandra, and Prince Zebmether, not content with their father's mockery, Voss continued. They want to erase us completely, our languages, our culture, our very existence. Dr. Elias Torino, the expedition's xenobiologist, pulled up biological scans of the Velthari leadership. The irony is perfect, he said with bitter satisfaction. Their neural pathways are remarkably similar to ours. They can learn human languages just as easily as we learn theirs. What are you suggesting? Asked Lieutenant Colonel Mira Castellanos, her hand instinctively moving to the plasma rifle at her hip. Torino's smile was predatory. I'm suggesting we return the favor. Every one of their kind that we capture goes through the same re-education process they've inflicted on our people. Let them experience firsthand what it feels like to have their identity stripped away. The room erupted in heated discussion. Some officers argued for mercy, others for complete annihilation, but Voss raised her hand for silence, her mind already working through the implications. No, she said finally, we don't sink to their level, but we do make them understand what they've done. She turned to face the assembled officers, her expression hard as vacuum-forged steel. We're going to capture those royal bastards alive. And yes, they're going to learn our languages, every single one of them. They're going to understand exactly what their father destroyed, exactly what they've tried to erase. Valdez nodded grimly. The Prometheus Protocol, modified. Voss replied, we're not just taking back our worlds. We're making sure that every Velthari noble, every military commander, every collaborator understands that humanity doesn't forgive. We adapt, we survive. And when we rise again, we make sure our enemies never forget why they should have finished the job when they had the chance. The tactical display came alive with star charts, showing Velthari positions across 17 systems. Red markers indicated their primary military installations, while blue dots marked the locations of surviving human populations. Fewer than 12 million souls scattered across the galaxy. How long do we have? Asked Castellanos. Intelligence suggests the heirs are planning a final purge, Okafor reported. They want to eliminate every trace of human DNA within the next 6 months. After that, they'll declare humanity extinct and move on to the next species. Voss smiled coldly. Then we'd better move fast, because I intend to show them that reports of our extinction have been greatly exaggerated. Outside the command center, the ice of Europa groaned and shifted, a sound like the galaxy itself preparing for war. The mining station Kepler 442c had been humanity's pride before the war, a massive orbital platform that processed rare metals from the system's asteroid belt. Now it served as Prince Kethver's personal research facility, where human prisoners were subjected to psychological conditioning experiments designed to perfect the subjugation process. Commander Valdez crouched behind a twisted piece of hull plating. His assault team spread across the station's outer ring. Through his visor, he could see the bioluminescent markings that covered every Velthari structure, organic growths that pulsed with their alien heartbeats, making the station feel more like the inside of some massive predator than a technological marvel. Thermal imaging shows 43 guards in the detention sector, whispered Sergeant Kai Nakamura through the comm. Most of them clustered around what looked like an amphitheater. Valdez felt his jaw clench. Intelligence had warned them about the education sessions, public demonstrations where Velthari nobles forced human prisoners to denounce their own species, their own languages, their own memories. Entertainment for the ruling class. Demo charges set on the power coupling, reported Corporal Anya Petrov. We'll have maybe 3 minutes of confusion before their backup systems come online. Remember the objective, Valdez reminded his team. We need HFY alive, but I don't give a damn about the rest of them. Signal when you're in position. One by one, the confirmations came in. 15 of humanity's best soldiers, each carrying enough hatred to fuel a small star and enough training to make that hatred surgical. The explosions came simultaneously from 6 different points. Across the station, lights died, artificial gravity fluctuated, and the organic wall growth shrieked in harmonic distress. In the confusion, Valdez led his team through the breach they carved in the outer hull. The first Velthari guard they encountered was twice human height, its chitinous exoskeleton gleaming purple-black in the emergency lighting. It raised what looked like a living weapon, some sort of bioengineered creature that spat acidic projectiles. Nakamura put 3 plasma rounds through its center mass before it could fire. Contact. Valdez shouted into his comm as more guards poured into the corridor. Multiple hostiles. Section C7. The Velthari moved with insectal grace, their forearms wielding weapons that seemed to grow from their own bodies. But they grown overconfident. After decades of hunting demoralized human survivors, they weren't prepared for soldiers who fought back with coordinated precision. Petrov rolled a cluster of microgrenades down the corridor, each one designed to fragment into thousands of monomolecular shards. The explosions turned the air into a glittering cloud of death that shredded through alien carapaces. Like tissue paper, they're trying to seal the detention sector, Nakamura called out, pointing to a massive blast door that was slowly grinding shut. Valdez sprinted forward, diving through the gap just as the door slammed closed behind him. He found himself in the amphitheater they'd seen on Thermal, a circular chamber with tiered seating, where dozens of Velthari had been watching the evenings. Entertainment in the center of the room. Prince HFY stood over a kneeling human child, maybe 10 years old, her face streaked with tears and mind-conditioning drugs. The prince held a neural interface device, its tendrils already attached to the girl's skull. Fascinating, HFY said in perfect English, his translator synthesizing his clicks and whistles into words. Another demonstration of human predictability. You've come to rescue this young meat, haven't you? The prince was magnificent in the way the apex predators were magnificent, 3 meters tall. His carapace inscribed with rank markings that told the story of 1,000 conquered worlds. 6 eyes, each the size of a human fist, tracked Valdez's movement with predatory interest. Let her go, Valdez said, raising his rifle. Around the amphitheater, Velthari nobles were reaching for their weapons, but they moved with the lazy confidence of creatures that had never faced real threat. Or what? You'll kill me. HFY's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. Do you know what this little animal was saying before you arrived? She was begging me to teach her proper speech, to help her forget the barbaric grunting of human language. Even your children understand their place in the natural order. Valdez squeezed the trigger. The plasma bolt took HFY in the shoulder, spinning him away from the child, but not dropping him. Velthari noble screamed. In shock, when was the last time one of their royalty had been injured by human hands? You want to teach lessons about the natural order? Valdez snarled, advancing on the wounded prince. Let me show you ours. The firefight that followed painted the amphitheater walls. With alien ichor and human blood, the Velthari had superior numbers and individual strength, but they'd grown soft from years of hunting broken survivors. Valdez fought with the desperate fury of a man who'd watched his species burn, who'd spent decades planning for this moment. When the smoke cleared, Prince HFY lay unconscious in a pool of his own blood, a neural suppression collar around his throat. The child was alive, traumatized, but breathing. and the walls were decorated with the remains of 17 Velthari nobles who learned too late that humanity's reputation for surrender had been greatly exaggerated. Packet secured. Valdez reported to his extraction team. Time to teach. Our royal friend some new vocabulary. Princess Ylandra stood before the Velthari High Command, her 6 arms gesticulating in barely controlled rage. The holographic display showed the smoking ruins of the Kepler 4 for the Sea Research Station, and more importantly, the empty cell where her brother should have been. They took him. She hissed, her translator converting her harmonic screams into Federation standard. These animals, these walking meatbags, they dared to lay hands on royal blood. The assembled war masters clicked their approval and outrage in equal measure. Fleet General Caxthul, his ancient carapace scarred by 100 campaigns, leaned forward on his throne of living bone. Perhaps the meat spawn are more dangerous than we assumed. Your Magnificence, our intelligence suggested they possessed fewer than 20 functional warships. Yet they struck with precision that suggests nothing. Ylandra shrieked, her bioluminescent crown tentacles flaring bright orange with fury. They are parasites, vermin. They succeeded only because Kepler grew careless in his amusement. I will not make the same mistake. She activated a tactical display showing human settlements across 17 systems, each one pulsed with a faint blue light, representing thousands of survivors who had somehow evaded extermination for decades. I want them all dead, she declared. Every human settlement, every hidden colony, every last breeding pair hiding in the asteroid belts, we in this farce within the solar rotation. War Master Vexanath, whose domain included the former human systems, shifted uneasily. Your Magnificence, the logistics of simultaneous strikes across such distance are your concern to solve, not mine to hear excuses about. Ylandra's voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. Deploy the harvest fleets. Use bioweapons if conventional assault proves insufficient. I want genocide, not conquest. The hologram shifted to show troop deployments. 53 battle cruisers, each carrying enough Velthari soldiers to sterilize a planet. Fungal weapons that would turn human lungs into breeding grounds for alien spores. Nanoswarms designed to unravel human DNA at the molecular level. Meanwhile, 3-star systems away, Prince Kepler was experiencing his first lesson in human linguistics. The interrogation chamber aboard the human battleship Defiance had been specially modified for their royal prisoner. Kepler hung suspended in a web of neural interface cables, his mind connected to an array of quantum computers running language learning algorithms. But these weren't the gentle teaching programs the Velthari used on human children. Dr. Torino monitored the process from behind reinforced glass, his fingers dancing across holographic controls that regulated the prince's neural stimulation. The beauty of this approach, he explained to Admiral Voss, is that it uses their own techniques. The Velthari brain is remarkably adaptable. They can absorb new languages at incredible speed. But that same adaptability makes them vulnerable to information overload. On the screens, Kepler's brainwaves showed the chaotic patterns of forced learning. The computers were feeding him every human language simultaneously: English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, Japanese, Swahili, along with complete cultural context for each one. Poetry, literature, historical records, philosophical treatises. The entire spectrum of human thought and feeling, compressed into concentrated data streams and forced directly into his neural pathways. How long? Until breakdown, Voss asked. Unknown. His species' brain structure is remarkably resilient. But the psychological impact? Torino smiled grimly. He's not just learning our words. He's experiencing our memories, our emotions, our entire cultural identity. Every time the Velthari forced a human child to forget their heritage, every act of cultural genocide, he's feeling it from our perspective. Kepler's eyes suddenly snapped open, all 6 of them focusing on Voss with an expression she'd never seen on a Velthari face before. Genuine fear. Please, he said in perfect English, then switched to Mandarin, then Arabic, Spanish, por favor, para esto. Fascinating, Torino murmured. He's not just learning vocabulary, he's absorbing the emotional weight behind each language. The pleading in his voice, that's not translation software, that's genuine linguistic empathy. But their experiment was interrupted by urgent alarms throughout the ship. Commander Valdez's voice crackled over the intercom. Admiral, we've got Incoming transmissions from 17 different systems. The Velthari are mobilizing everything they have. The tactical display in the interrogation chamber came alive with enemy fleet movements. Red markers swept across the galaxy like a plague, converging on every known human settlement simultaneously. They're going for complete extermination, Voss breathed, total genocide. Through the neural interface, HFY heard and understood every word. His newly acquired human linguistic centers processed not just the tactical information, but the emotional devastation it represented. Millions of humans about to die. Children who would never learn their parents' languages. Cultures that would vanish forever. For the first time in his existence, a Velthari prince understood what extinction felt like from the perspective of the extinct. Stop, he whispered, his voice carrying the weighted desperation of every human language he'd absorbed. You have to stop them. Ylandra doesn't understand. None of us understood. Your languages, your cultures, they're not just communication. They're the soul of your species. If she destroys them all. He trailed off, his newly awakened empathy warring with millennia of predatory instinct. Voss leaned close to the glass. Then help us. Tell us where she'll strike first. Give us something we can use. HFY's mandibles clicked in distress. His translator struggling to convert concepts he'd never possessed words for before. She will target the nursery worlds first. The places where you keep your young. Kepler 186f, Ross 1 to 8b, Proxima Centauri b. She believes that destroying your children will break your species' will to resist. She's wrong, Voss said simply. Yes, HFY agreed, his voice heavy with newfound understanding. She is very wrong. The human colony on Kepler 186f had been built inside the hollowed-out remains of an asteroid. Its population of 12,000 representing one of the largest concentrations of survivors in known space. They survived by staying hidden, by avoiding the Velthari hunting fleets, by sacrificing everything for the slim hope that their children might outlive the war. Now they watched their sensors as Princess Ylandra's flagship, the Flesh Render, emerged from hyperspace with an escort of 8 heavy cruisers. Colony Administrator Beth Kowalski stood in the command center, her weathered face grim as she studied the tactical display. How long do we have? 18 hours until they reach optimal bombardment range, replied Defense Coordinator Marcus Webb, his prosthetic legs whirring as he moved between control stations. But they're not rushing. They want us to see them coming, through the asteroids. Viewing ports. Colonists could see the Velthari ships approaching organic monstrosities that looked more grown than built, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent weapon systems. Each ship was a living thing, a symbiotic merger of Velthari biotechnology and captured alien organisms. The flagship alone was large enough to house 50,000 warriors. Evacuation status? Kowalski asked. Impossible, Webb replied bluntly. Even if we had enough ships, which we don't, they'd hunt down every transport before we clear the system. We're going to have to make our stand here. The colony's total military force consisted of 230 volunteers, most of them civilians who'd learned to fight out of necessity. They had mining equipment converted into weapons, jury-rigged defense systems, and enough righteous fury to light a star. Against the Velthari, it would be a massacre. But Beth Kowalski hadn't survived 40 years of war by accepting the obvious. What about the reactor cores? She asked. Webb's expression shifted from resignation to understanding. You're talking about turning the entire asteroid into a weapon. I'm talking about making sure that when Princess Ylandra wipes us out, she pays a price that her species will remember for generations. The plan was suicidal in the most literal sense. They would rig every nuclear reactor in the colony to overload simultaneously, turning their home into a fusion bomb capable of cracking planets. When the Velthari moved in for the kill, they'd find themselves at ground zero of an explosion visible from 3-star systems away. As the colonists worked to prepare their final gambit, similar scenes were playing out across human space. On Ross 1 to 8b, 2,000 survivors armed themselves with mining explosives and prepared to take as many aliens with them as possible. On Proxima Centauri b, the last human university had converted their research labs into weapons manufacturing centers, their professors and students working side by side to create devices that would have been considered war crimes before the war. But the most significant preparation was taking place aboard the Defiance, where Prince HFY had become an unwilling expert on human tactical psychology. Your species fights differently when extinction is imminent, he told Admiral Voss. his voice carrying the linguistic patterns of every human culture he'd absorbed. The Velthari expect submission, fear, desperation, but humans become more dangerous. When cornered, not less, Voss studied the tactical display showing enemy fleet movements. What would your sister expect from a cornered animal, cowering, begging? Perhaps a few symbolic gestures of defiance before inevitable surrender. HFY's mandibles clicked with what might have been regret. She has no concept of sacrifice for future generations. Velthari preserve themselves first. Always. The idea of deliberately dying to protect others is alien to us. Then she's about to get an education. The first attacks began 6 hours later. Princess Yolandra's forces struck the human settlements with overwhelming firepower, expecting quick, clean exterminations. Instead, they found prepared kill zones where every death was designed to cost the attackers as much as possible. On Kepler 186f, the flesh render moved into bombardment position, its bioweapons preparing to sterilize the asteroid's surface. Princess Yolandra herself stood on the command deck, eager to watch the final destruction of this human nest begin planetary cleansing. She ordered. The first energy beams lashed out toward the asteroid and struck a surface that was already exploding outward. Beth Kowalski had triggered the reactor overload just as the Velthari opened fire, turning their own weapons into the ignition source for humanity's final gift. The explosion that followed consumed the flesh render and half its escort fleet in a ball of nuclear fire that briefly outshone the system's star. Princess Yolandra died still trying to understand what had happened. Her final thoughts a confusion of disbelief that prey animals had chosen mutual destruction over submission. Similar scenes played out across 17 systems. The human colony on Ross 1 to 8b lasted exactly 14 minutes against the Velthari assault. But in those 14 minutes, they killed over 3,000 alien warriors. With improvised weapons and suicide charges, the university on Proxima Centauri B became a fortress where professors fought with equations, and students died clutching experimental weapons that turned Velthari biotechnology against itself. When the reports reached the surviving Velthari command structure, they painted a picture that challenged every assumption the aliens had made about human nature. In 18 separate engagements, human forces had chosen extinction over surrender, taking massive numbers of Velthari with them in final acts of defiance that defied all logic. Prince Zebmith, the youngest of the royal heirs, stared at the casualty reports in growing horror. Over 40,000 Velthari dead, 17 of their finest warships destroyed. Princess Yolandra herself killed by creatures she dismissed as barely sentient. They're not fighting to win, he realized, speaking to his assembled war masters. They're fighting to make us pay. Every human death costs us dozens of our own warriors. At this rate, achieving total extermination will cripple our military capacity for generations. But it was War Master Thekanol who spoke the thought that chilled every Velthari in the room. What if this is what they wanted all along? What if they've been planning this since the war began? The question hung in the air like a curse, because suddenly the human behavior patterns made terrible sense. Hide until the enemy commits to total extermination. Force them to overextend their forces across multiple systems. Then make every victory so costly that victory becomes indistinguishable from defeat. It was strategy on a scale that spanned decades. A plan so patient and ruthless that it redefined what it meant to be an apex predator. Prince Zebmith's rage was a thing of terrible beauty, his bioluminescent war crown pulsing crimson as he addressed the combined Velthari fleet. Above the shattered remains of what had once been Proxima Centauri B, his sister's death had transformed the youngest heir from a pampered noble into something far more dangerous, a predator with nothing left to lose. Enough games, he declared to his assembled war masters, his harmonic voice carrying across 17 capital ships. No more systematic extermination. No more careful strategic strikes. I want every human stronghold identified and crushed simultaneously. We end this today. The intelligence reports spread across the tactical display painted a stark picture. After the suicidal defenses at the colony worlds, human survivors had consolidated into 13 major strongholds scattered across 9 star systems. Each fortress represented thousands of humans who had decided that if they were going to die, they would do so on their own terms. The largest concentration was located in the Tau Ceti system, where Admiral Voss had gathered the remnants of humanity's fleet around a massive space station called Terminus. The facility had originally been a deep space research platform, But 40 years of continuous modification had transformed it into a nightmare of overlapping defensive systems and redundant weapon platforms. 17,000 humans confirmed at the primary target, reported Fleet Intelligence Coordinator Meg Scully. Their defensive capabilities include approximately 40 capital ships, extensive orbital mines, and what appears to be a planetary MASS driver constructed from asteroid mining equipment. Zevman studied the tactical display with growing anticipation. Unlike his siblings, he had inherited their father's strategic mind, along with the traditional Velthari hunger for violence. They've made a mistake by consolidating their forces. They've given us the opportunity to end the war with a single decisive battle. What the prince didn't know was that the consolidation had been carefully planned by Admiral Voss and her war council. Every human stronghold was connected by quantum communication networks. Their tactical systems synchronized to respond as a single unified force. When the Velthari attacked Terminus, they would face not just the defenders of one station, but the coordinated firepower of humanity's last military assets. The battle began with Prince Zevmeth's flagship, the Bone Cathedral, emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the Tau Ceti system. Behind it came the largest Velthari fleet ever assembled, 43 capital ships, 200 escort vessels, and over 300,000 warriors eager to avenge their fallen princess. Aboard Terminus Station, Admiral Voss watched the enemy fleets approach with grim satisfaction. The tactical display showed not just the immediate threat, but the positions of human forces throughout the galaxy, ships that had been waiting in hyperspace for exactly this moment. All stations report ready, Commander Valdez announced from his position at the Fire Control Center. The Prometheus protocol is armed and awaiting your command. Voss nodded, her scarred hand steady as she activated the quantum communicator that would coordinate humanity's final gambit. This is Admiral Voss to all human forces. Today we show these bastards what happens when they corner an apex predator. Remember, we're not fighting to win. We're fighting to make them remember why they should have finished the job 40 years ago. The first exchange of fire came at maximum range. Velthari bioweapons lashing out with streams of living acid and crystalline projectiles that could phase through conventional armor. Terminus Station responded with its mass driver, a weapon system that accelerated asteroid-sized chunks of iron and nickel to near-light speed. The projectiles smashed through Velthari shields like bullets through tissue paper, vaporizing 3 escort ships in the opening salvo. But the real battle began when Prince Zevmeth's fleet closed to boarding range. The Velthari had learned from their previous encounters with human desperation. Instead of trying to capture or negotiate, they came prepared for total extermination. Bioweapons that turned oxygen into poison, nanoswarms that dissolved human DNA, warrior forms specifically engineered to hunt in the close confines of space stations. The Bone Cathedral slammed into Terminus Station's docking bay with enough force to shatter a small moon, its living hull melting through the station's armor plating like acid through flesh. From the breach poured a tide of Velthari warriors, not the elegant nobles who had dominated the early war, but purpose-bred killing machines with enhanced exoskeletons and grafted weapons. Lieutenant Colonel Castellanos led the first response team, her assault marines meeting the alien boarders in the station's main corridor. The firefight that followed was less battle than mutual slaughter. Humans with plasma rifles and explosive charges facing creatures that shrugged off small arms fire and struck back with claws that could shear through steel. Section C is compromised, Castellanos shouted into her calm, her voice barely audible over the screaming of wounded humans and the chittering war cries of dying aliens. They're pushing toward the command center. But even as Terminus Station bled and burned, the true scope of humanity's strategy became apparent. The quantum communicators activated throughout the galaxy, and suddenly the Velthari fleet found itself under attack from directions they hadn't expected. Human ships that had been hiding in asteroid belts and nebulae for decades erupted from concealment, striking at the Velthari fleet's flanks and rear. Each vessel was a suicide weapon, ships packed with nuclear warheads and crewed by volunteers who had no intention of surviving the battle. The heavy cruiser Indomitable rammed the Velthari battleship Flesh Weaver at full acceleration, its captain shouting defiance in 17 human languages as both ships died in nuclear fire. The destroyer Last Hope used its entire ammunition supply to cripple the enemy escorts before its crew manually triggered a reactor overload that took a third ship with them. Aboard the Bone Cathedral, Prince Zevmeth watched his fleet die with growing disbelief. The humans weren't just fighting, they were orchestrating their own extinction in ways designed to inflict maximum damage on their killers. Every ship that died took multiple Velthari vessels with it. Every station that fell did so in explosions that could be seen from neighboring star systems. They're insane, War Master Kexthol reported, his communication barely coherent through the interference from multiple nuclear detonations. They're destroying their own people to deny us victory. No, Zebmith realized with growing horror, they're teaching us the cost of genocide. The battle raged for 18 hours, a running engagement that consumed ships and lives with mechanical efficiency. When the last human vessel finally died, when Terminus Station's wreckage had been scattered across the Tau Ceti system like a memorial to defiance, Prince Zebmith surveyed the cost of his victory. Of his original fleet of 43 capital ships, only 7 remain operational. Over 200,000 Velthari warriors had died, nearly the entire professional military class of their species. The humans had been exterminated, but they had achieved something far more significant than survival. They had broken the back of the Velthari war machine, leaving their enemies victorious but crippled, triumphant but terrified of what other prey species might be capable of when driven to desperation. The war was over. But as Prince Zebmith stared at the wreckage of both fleets, he began to understand that victory and defeat were not always the same thing. Prince Zebmith stood alone in the ruins of his flagship's command center, surrounded by the cooling corpses of his war masters and the acrid smell of burning biocircuits. The Bone Cathedral had survived the battle at Tau Ceti, but barely, its living hull scarred by human weapons, its neural networks damaged beyond repair. Of the once mighty Velthari fleet, only 6 ships remain operational, limping through space with skeleton crews and failing life support systems. The prince's 6 eyes stared at the tactical display, showing the aftermath of humanity's final gambit. 17 star systems marked with the red icons of total sterilization. Not a single human settlement remained intact. Not a single member of their species had survived the systematic extermination that had consumed the last 3 standard cycles. Victory, complete, absolute, perfect victory. So why did it feel like defeat? The answer came in the form of intercepted communications from across Velthari space. Colonial governors reporting massive military casualties. Industrial worlds demanding protection from their depleted fleet. Subject species watching the survivors of humanity's final battle and asking dangerous questions about the cost of rebellion. Your Magnificence. Weast Communications Master Yexkali, her carapace cracked and leaking ichor from wounds sustained during the boarding action at Terminus Station. Priority transmission from the Hegemony Core worlds. The Council of Queens demands your immediate return. Zebmith activated the holographic display, his bioluminescent crown pulsing with exhausted authority. The image that formed was one of the most terrifying sights in the known galaxy. Queen Mother Velthara herself, the ancient matriarch whose reign had lasted over 2,000 standard years. My prince, she said, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of disapproval that made the ship's hull shiver. You have achieved the extinction of the human vermin. Congratulations. Now explain to me why this victory has cost us our military supremacy over half the galaxy. The statistics that followed were damning. The Velthari had lost 60% of their battle fleet, 70% of their professional warrior class, and 80% of their assault specialists. Colonial worlds that had been pacified for centuries were reporting civil unrest. 3 entire species had declared independence, gambling that the crippled Velthari couldn't mount effective retaliation. The humans were more dangerous than we anticipated, Zebmith replied, fighting to keep defensive whining out of his harmonic patterns. Their final strategy was designed to maximize our casualties even in defeat. They transformed their own extinction into a weapon against us. Indeed, the Queen Mother agreed coldly. And now you will explain to the full council why our 1,000-year reign is threatened by the death throes of a single inferior species. The transmission ended, leaving Zebmith alone with the magnitude of his Pyrrhic victory. He moved through the damaged ship, past the medical bays where wounded warriors clicked and chittered in pain, past the bioforges that no longer had enough raw material to repair the ship's living systems. In the trophy hall, he found the prize that had started this final phase of the war, his brother HFY, still suspended in the neural interface web that had been his prison for months. The human language learning program had been disabled when the Defiance was destroyed, but its effects remained. HFY's eyes tracked his brother's approach with an intelligence that had been fundamentally altered by months of forced exposure to human thought patterns. Brother, HFY said, his voice carrying the weight of 17 human languages. You look like someone who has won everything and lost even more. Zebmith studied his sibling's face, noting the subtle changes that extended beyond mere linguistic programming. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something the youngest prince had never seen in a Velthari before: genuine empathy. The humans are extinct, Zebmith announced. Every last one of them. Their final strongholds have been sterilized, their fleets destroyed, their entire species wiped from existence. Yes, HFY agreed sadly. I felt them die. Every language that will never be spoken again, every story that will never be told, every song that will never be sung. Do you understand what we've done, brother? We've committed murder against the concept of diversity itself. Zebmith's mandibles clicked with irritation. We've eliminated a threat to Velthari supremacy, just as our father would have wanted. Our father was a fool. The words hung in the air like blasphemy. But HFY continued without hesitation. He saw the humans as prey because they surrendered after losing single battles. But he never understood that they weren't surrendering. They were learning, studying us, preparing for the moment when surrender would no longer be an option. The prince moved to a viewing port, staring out at the debris field that had once been Terminus Station. Scattered among the wreckage were the hulks of Velthari, ships, testament to the cost of their final victory. They turned their own extinction into a strategic weapon. HFY continued, think about it, brother. Every species in the galaxy now knows exactly what it costs to completely exterminate a determined enemy. Every subject world that's considering rebellion has seen what humans can accomplish when cornered. We didn't just kill a species, we created a template for resistance that will haunt us for generations. Zebmith felt something cold crawling up his exoskeleton, and emotion he'd never experienced before. Fear, not of immediate danger, but of consequences that stretched beyond his ability to comprehend. The other species are already moving, he admitted. The crystalline hives have declared independence. The methane breathers are massing their fleets. The Bioneural Collective has cut all communication with our colonies. Because they've done the calculations, HFY said with terrible certainty. They've realized that if the weak humans could cripple our military with their extinction, what could a prepared and united rebellion accomplish? We've taught the galaxy that the Velthari can be bled, that we can be hurt, that our dominance has limits. Through the ship's communication systems came reports from across their empire. Colonial administrators requesting immediate military support. Trade worlds reporting suspicious fleet movements from their pacified neighbors. Intelligence services warning of coordination between previously unconnected species. How long? Zebmith asked. 6 months, HFY replied with the certainty of someone who had absorbed the strategic thinking of an entire species, maybe less. They'll coordinate their rebellions to prevent us from concentrating our remaining forces. And we don't have the military strength to suppress even one major uprising, let alone a galaxy-wide revolution. The irony was perfect and terrible. In achieving the complete extermination of humanity, the Velthari had signed the death warrant of their own empire. The humans had been too dangerous to let live, but killing them had required resources that left their killers defenseless against every other threat in the galaxy. What do we do? Zebmith asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability that would have horrified his father. HFY smiled, an expression that should have been impossible for a Velthari face to make, but one that months of human linguistic programming had somehow taught him. We learn. He said simply, we adapt. We find a way to survive in a galaxy that no longer fears us, and perhaps, if we're very lucky and very smart, we find a way to make peace with the consequences of our victory outside the ship. The wreckage of the fleets drifted in the vacuum, a monument to the moment when predator and prey had switched roles for the final time. The war was over, but its true consequences were just beginning. 5 years after the extinction of humanity, the Velthari hegemony was dying. Prince Zebmith, now bearing the title of War Commander Supreme by default rather than merit, stood in the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's most feared military installation. The orbital command fortress above Velthari Prime had been magnificent, once a living structure that pulsed with the heartbeat of 1,000 conquered worlds. Now its biocorridors were dark, its neural networks severed, its weapon systems powered down and abandoned. The irony was not lost on him. In the end, it hadn't been a massive galactic uprising that brought down their empire. It had been simple mathematics. The Crystalline Hive Confederation has accepted our surrender terms, reported his aide. Fleet Coordinator Next Molly. Her once proud Carapace now marked with the scars of a dozen losing battles. They're offering subsistence-level resource allocations in exchange for complete military disarmament. Zebmeth's 6 eyes studied the holographic display showing what remained of Velthari space. 3 systems out of the original 47. 12 billion Velthari reduced to fewer than 2 billion. Most of them civilian refugees crammed into overcrowded habitat domes. The mighty warrior caste that had terrorized the galaxy, for millennia now numbered in the thousands rather than millions. And the others? The Bioneural Collective is offering resettlement worlds in exchange for our biotechnology. Databases. The methane breathers want our quantum navigation systems. The Iron Republic. Next Molly hesitated. The Iron Republic is offering us what they call educational opportunities. The phrase carried ominous implications. In the 5 years since humanity's extinction, the galaxy's former subject species had not simply rebelled. They had formed the most comprehensive military alliance in recorded history. Every technique that the humans had demonstrated in their final battles had been studied, refined, and adapted. The template of sacrificial warfare had evolved into something far more sophisticated and terrifying. "Where's my brother?" Zebmeth asked. "In a linguistics center. He's still working on the project." Zebmeth made his way through the dying fortress to what had once been an interrogation facility. Now it served as something unprecedented in Velthari history, a cultural preservation center. Prince Kefir stood before a vast holographic display showing thousands of data streams, his 6 arms manipulating controls with practiced precision. Recording session 7412. Kefir announced to the recording apparatus. English language, North American dialect, circa Earth year 2387. The subject is a lullaby titled Hush Little Baby, traditionally sung by parents to comfort frightened children. His voice, when he began to sing, carried no trace of Velthari harmonic patterns. The melody was purely human, soft, gentle, filled with the kind of love that had once seemed alien to their predatory species. "Why?" Zebmeth asked when the recording ended. Kefir turned, his transformed features showing an expression that their father would have considered genetic defectiveness. "Compassion. Because someone has to remember them. The humans are extinct. But their languages, their stories, their songs, these were never just communication tools. They were the soul of their species, and we destroyed them." The holographic display showed the scope of his brother's obsession. Complete reconstructions of human cultural artifacts, painstakingly assembled from fragments of intercepted communications, captured databases, and the memories of witnesses. 17 human languages preserved in perfect detail. Thousands of stories, songs, poems, and philosophical treatises. The entire intellectual heritage of a species that no longer existed. The galaxy's new rulers want to study human tactical doctrine, Kefir continued. They want to understand how a primitive species managed to inflict such devastating casualties on a supposedly superior enemy. But I think there's something more important they need to understand. He activated a new display showing linguistic analysis patterns. Human languages weren't just tools for conveying information. They were repositories of emotional concepts that we lack words for. Sacrifice for strangers, love that extends beyond, genetic kinship, hope that persists despite hopeless circumstances. The humans didn't fight the way they did because they were tactically sophisticated. They fought that way because their languages taught them to value things more than their own survival. Zebmeth studied the data streams, each one representing aspects of human cognition that Velthari had never developed. "And you think this knowledge will help us survive?" "I think it's the only thing that can help us survive," Kefir replied. "The galaxy's new masters aren't going to make the same mistake we made. They're not going to exterminate us. They're going to do something far more sophisticated. They're going to change us." As if summoned by his words, the communication system activated. The image that formed was that of Coordinator Prime Zixthak of the Iron Republic, a crystalline being whose species had been among the first to rebel after humanity's extinction. Prince Zebmeth, the alien said, its voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself sing. "The Galactic Reconciliation Council has reached a decision regarding the Velthari question. Your species will be granted survival privileges, but under specific conditions." The terms that followed were more comprehensive than any military conquest in galactic history. Complete disarmament, mandatory re-education for all Velthari above the age of maturity, reproductive controls to prevent military caste regeneration, and most significantly, cultural integration programs designed to introduce alien concepts of empathy and cooperation into Velthari society. You will learn our languages, Coordinator Prime Zixathak concluded, all of them. You will study our histories, our philosophies, our concepts of ethical behavior. You will become, by choice or by conditioning, the kind of species that can coexist peacefully with others. The transmission ended, leaving the two princes alone with the magnitude of their species' transformation. They would survive, but as something unrecognizable Velthari in form, but alien in thought. Their predatory nature suppressed by the same techniques they had once used on conquered species. Poetic justice, HFY observed. Father mocked humanity by forcing them to learn our language. Now his sons will spend their lives learning the languages of everyone we tried to dominate. Zebmeth moved to the viewing port, staring out at the stars that had once trembled at the approach of Velthari fleets. Now those same stars hosted worlds where former slaves had become rulers, where the techniques of human resistance had evolved into the foundation of galactic democracy. Do you think they planned this? He asked. The humans, I mean. Do you think they knew that their extinction would trigger our downfall? HFY considered the question with the enhanced empathy that months of human linguistic programming had given him. I don't think they planned it, he said finally. I think they simply fought according to their nature. They valued their cultures more than their lives, their children's future more than their own survival, their species' dignity more than tactical advantage. They couldn't conceive of surrender because surrender would have meant becoming something other than human, and we couldn't conceive of the cost. No, we saw them as prey because they seemed weak. But strength isn't always about individual survival. Sometimes strength is about making your death matter more than your life. Outside the fortress, the first transport ships were arriving to begin the relocation of Velthari civilians to their new homes on alien worlds. They would learn new languages, adopt new customs, raise their children according to foreign values. Within a generation, the Velthari as a cultural entity would cease to exist, replaced by something that embodied the cooperative ideals of their former subjects. It was. HFY realized the most perfect victory humanity could have achieved. They had not simply defended themselves, they had transformed their killers into the kind of species that would never again threaten another civilization. Their extinction had become a form of immortality, their final battle a lesson that would shape galactic civilization for millennia to come. Record session 7413, HFY announced, his voice carrying the weight of linguistic patterns from dozens of species. Human cultural analysis. Final entry. The subject is a concept they called Pyrrhic. Victory, winning a battle at such cost that the victory becomes indistinguishable from defeat. He paused, looking at his brother with eyes that had learned to see beyond the simple predator-prey relationships that had defined their species for eons. The humans taught us that language is more than communication, he continued. Its identity, its culture, is the essence of what makes a species unique. When we forced them to forget their words, we tried to kill their souls. When they chose extinction over submission, they showed us what souls are worth. The recording ended, but the lesson would continue. Across the galaxy, in schools run by species that had once been slaves, young beings of all kinds would learn about the humans, who had died to prove that freedom was worth any price. They would study the languages that HFY had preserved, the stories that embodied human values, the songs that carried their dreams across the void. And sometimes, late at night when the stars were bright, teachers would tell their students about Admiral Kestra Voss and Commander Rip Valdez, about Beth Kowalski and Marcus Webb, about all the humans who had chosen to make their deaths into weapons that could never be dulled or broken. The Velthari Empire was dead, but humanity's legacy would live forever, encoded in the languages and cultures of every species that learned the true meaning of courage from those who had demonstrated it in their final hour. In the end, the prey had become the teacher, and the predator had become the student, and across the galaxy, in classrooms filled with beings who had never seen a human face, children learned their first and most important lesson. Some things are worth dying for, and when you find them, death becomes just another form of victory.